Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome back to the DMZ.
Yes, sorry to abandon you. Had a little vacay, family vacay, which of course is never much of a vacay at all. But I am allegedly, I might be a little tanned, and I would have been rested if I didn't have an assignment last night that kept me up till 2:30 in the morning. But I was almost rested for the show.
Almost. I'm a little worried. I feel like we didn't tape last week, and I didn't hear a lot of complaining. And it may be that we prep people, and it just may be that they don't need Bill and Matt anymore to kick around.
That can't be. That can't be. There's only one place you want to go for your corporatist neoliberal rhino white male analysis, and that's the DMZ.
Yeah, the Venn diagrams is very small, and that's us.
So today is Biden Day. It is Thursday morning. He had his announcement video 3.5 hours ago. There was a little bit of drama around the video because apparently a well-known ad maker named Mark Putnam, who did the Amy McGrath video in the midterms, did the MJ Hagar video, and I think the Randy Bryce video. So sort of the three big viral videos of the midterms he did, and he was seen shooting with Biden around his boyhood home in Scranton. But apparently, the biographical spot was not what his advisors wanted in the end, and instead they went with a different media team and produced the spot that was, mainly Biden speaking to the camera, talking about Charlottesville and how we need to bring the nation together to get past Trump's bigotry.
I would really like to see the bio spot because I suspect that it was a better ad than what.
So you didn't like it. You didn't like it.
I didn't like it. It's so first of all, I just question the fundamental premise that Charlottesville is the defining moment of our times. That's more arguable, but it's not clear to me that that's correct. And then B, that Joe Biden is the guy to talk about it, and that's the issue, the defining issue that Joe Biden should choose to launch his campaign on. Strikes me as very, at the very least, a questionable strategic decision.
Well, I mean, not that I want to say definitively this is clearly the right way to go and all will be proven in due time, but I certainly see the logic behind it. I think Charlottesville is a pretty big inflection point for the left, and I think much of what a good chunk of the Democratic base wants in a nominee and a president is somebody who is going to, be a spokesperson for the kind of multicultural, diverse America seeking racial justice and gender justice and LGBT justice. They want that person to be the person who's going to prioritize that. And
I think I can make a better ad describing what you just said, but not hanging it on a 3-year-old or however-year-old news story. I think what you've just described is a very positive, optimistic thing, that Joe Biden, and by the way, there's not even a picture of him and Barack Obama in the ad, I don't think. He was Barack Obama's vice president for 8 years.
Well, we might want to be a little careful about that.
Maybe. He's going to launch his campaign. His first rally is going to be, I think, Pittsburgh at a Union Hall. That, in my opinion, those two things are Joe Biden. And I think you could then certainly talk about all the things you just talked about. Like, we're going to bring back decency. I just don't understand specifically the ad is about Charlottesville. That takes up a lot of time and the focus. I just don't know why Joe Biden would make that his thing.
Well, I think he's trying to be two-pronged here. He's trying to be, one, the union guy. I mean, in this run-up in April, he had 3 big union speeches. one at the Stop and Shop strike, and two others in union halls. And these are audiences that were, I believe, fairly white and fairly male. And there is certainly the risk for Biden is going to be seen as just that guy, just the white working class guy. And there's definitely a strain in the Democratic Party that says, we should not be bending over backwards to chase those voters, because then you're going to deprioritize the race issues and the gender issues. And with Biden already taking shots for his handling of the Anita Hill hearings, for inappropriate touching, for his stance against busing in the 70s, there's a risk that Biden was going to lean too far.
What I'm hearing you say is that his announcement video, the strategic decisions to do what he did, are not based on his brand and him going on offense. They're based on him checking boxes to appease and sort of soften predictable attacks coming at him. Like, should you define the launch of your campaign based on mitigating questions?
I don't think this is Biden. I mean, there are defensive elements there, to be sure. But I think Biden has always wanted to be both things. I think the key to a successful Biden candidacy, assuming it is going to be successful, is to be all of it. That he is the guy who doesn't have to pick a lane. That he is someone who is as comfortable with the white working class as talking about feminist issues, as talking about race issues. What complicates that story is some of these elements from his past. And what I wrote, I can't remember if we talked about it here now, but I wrote my piece in Politico earlier this month, the two Biden problem. Obviously it's harder for Biden to say I've always been on the side of racial justice when he was pretty vociferously anti-busing, but his argument was always at the time that busing was a bad way to go about achieving racial harmony, not that he was against racial harmony.
I think that's a perfectly defensible and legitimate argument to make now. But I don't think would make that argument today. I think he would run away.
No, but he had. I mean, when these things have come up, he hasn't. It's been through a spokesman, not him. But that's basically he wrote about it in his own memoir in 2007 when he first ran for president. So, he laid it out very stark. Like, he even called busing a, quote, liberal train wreck in his 2007 memoir.
What year, when he wrote the bio, in what year?
2007. This is the run-up to his 2008 presidential run.
Okay.
So he's been pretty consistent on that point. But he's always wanted to couple that with that my heart has always been towards achieving racial equality and racial harmony. I just think there's a better way to go about it.
Right, which I think is fine. I just think there's a better way to go about it as a campaign. Let's just think about the last 20 or 25 years, the things that have happened in America that have defined us. We had 9/11, a really big event that Biden doesn't mention in the rollout. We've got with the Iraq War. We had the Great Recession. Right now we're dealing with things like automation. We had Donald Trump go to Russia, go to Helsinki and say that he believes Vladimir Putin over the intel community. I'm just saying there's a lot of weird stuff and consequential stuff that has happened in recent years. And in Joe Biden's lifetime, certainly, there's a World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Challenger disaster. I don't know. You could go through all sorts of crazy things that have happened in our history since Joe Biden's been around. And he picks Charlottesville as the defining reason to launch his presidential campaign. It strikes me as odd.
Well, Charlottesville is arguably the moment that makes indisputable Trump's bigoted sensibilities. When he said there are good people on both sides, and one of those sides were neo-Nazis shitting Jews will not replace us, that really strips whatever mask was on off. And by making
Donald Trump is exactly who I thought he was 5 years, 10 years before.
You still could argue that it was wholly unsurprising considering what happened before. But to do it as president was shocking. And Biden is one making the race about Trump and about getting rid of Trump. So it's not making about, at least in this intro, about checking Bernie or checking Warren. He is not arguing in this first video, you need a white male, we can't have a woman, we can't have a person of color. He's saying those issues are paramount. We need to come together to eradicate what he called an aberration in the White House. And without saying it explicitly, the clear implication is, I'm the best guy to do that.
Yes. See, I think you're onto something, but I think it's a bank shot, because I'll tell you what. In my opinion, the obvious thing is, if you're Joe Biden, it should be, I was Barack Obama's vice president for 8 years. I can beat Donald Trump because I can win. I can win in Ohio and Pennsylvania, maybe not Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. And I can restore normalcy. Like, those would be the obvious thing. In my mind, if the problem with this is, if Charlottesville is the most important issue to you, then you don't naturally think Joe Biden. You would think, I don't know, Kamala Harris or someone else. But I think what Biden is maybe implying is, if Charlottesville is your most important issue, I'm the one, Kamala can't win, but I can. To me, that seems like a kind of an indirect bank shot, like route to get to a message. Wouldn't it be smarter or more coherent to just talk about what Joe Biden can deliver, instead of trying to get to this, presumption that Kamala and others can't win?
I mean, it's an inherently complicated issue. How do you argue that you're the best person to resolve racism and misogyny? You can either you can point to your record, and there are things Biden can say in his record, but it is a complicated record. You can suggest that your own biography, your own being, your own demographic attributes implicitly give you. I mean, Obama, certainly leveraged his biracial identity to suggest he would be a healer for the country. And Biden can't do that. He can suggest, taking the better parts of his record, the one implicit thing he has, that he was Obama's VP. I don't think he has to wield that like a sledgehammer, but that's obviously in the mix. But it's what you choose to talk about and how you choose to talk about it at the end of the day is going to articulate that. And I think what Biden is trying to avoid here, and this is arguably a bit defensive, is a lot of the field there's an increased awareness that black votes matter big in a Democratic primary. South Carolina is big. If you can't win that constituency, you're going to have a big problem putting together a diverse coalition. And so a lot of the less experienced candidates have been pushed towards taking more politically controversial positions, namely reparations, supporting the bill that would have a reparations commission. And I don't know maybe Biden's going to come out for that, for all I know. But he certainly hasn't yet. I don't, and not just appeal to the left. I mean, the reparations polls very poorly. I mean, it's divisive amongst Democrats and it's horrible amongst independents and Republicans. And I'm sure Biden is aware of that fact. So if Biden doesn't want to chase everybody else in reparations, he wants to take something that is less controversial. Man, Trump's remarks in Charlottesville were manifestly and undisputably horrible. And take that head on. That's safer ground for him to be on, and I think he can do that without alienating not just the Democratic, the partisan Democratic Union members he's going to speak to when he goes to Pittsburgh, but also the not so Democratic white working class people that he wants to eventually appeal to down the line.
Yeah, I mean, I'm operating under the premise that a campaign launch video should be underscoring your argument for why you should be the nominee. But maybe I'm putting too much pressure on the announcement.
But I think this is part of the argument. I mean, I don't think this is a secondary part of the Biden argument. I think it is on the same plane.
If voters go into the polls on Election Day saying, who is the person they're saying, like, the thing I care most about is Charlottesville, I don't think Biden wins that unless it's coupled with the electability argument. And it reminds me a little bit, didn't Hillary get in a little bit of a minor kerfluffle over suggesting that it was LBJ and not MLK who actually brought about civil rights?
That was in the 2008 primary.
Isn't this kind of the same, in a similar vein?
No, I totally disagree. I think you're getting a little hung up on Charlottesville being this sort of single event. Charlottesville is a symbolic event about Trump's bigotry, which is not a small thing, certainly to Democratic base voters, and not just appeal to the left. I mean, the reparations polls very poorly. I mean, it's divisive amongst Democrats and it's horrible amongst independents and Republicans. And I'm sure Biden is aware of that fact. So if Biden doesn't want to chase everybody else in reparations, he wants to take something that is less controversial. Man, Trump's remarks in Charlottesville were manifestly and undisputably horrible, and take that head on. That's safer ground for him to be on, and I think he can do that without alienating not just the partisan Democratic Union members he's going to speak to when he goes to Pittsburgh, but also the not so Democratic white working class people that he wants to eventually appeal to down the line.
Yeah, I mean, I'm operating under the premise that a campaign launch video should be underscoring your argument for why you should be the nominee. But maybe I'm putting too much pressure on the announcement.
But I think this is part of the argument. I mean, I don't think this is a secondary part of the Biden argument. I think it is on the same plane.
If voters go into the polls on Election Day saying, who is the person they're saying, like, the thing I care most about is Charlottesville, I don't think Biden wins that unless it's coupled with the electability argument. And it reminds me a little bit, didn't Hillary get in a little bit of a minor kerfluffle over suggesting that it was LBJ and not MLK who actually brought about civil rights? That
was in the 2008 primary.
Isn't this kind of the same, in a similar vein?
No, I totally disagree. I think you're getting a little hung up on Charlottesville being this sort of single event. Charlottesville is a symbolic event about Trump's bigotry, which is not a small thing, certainly to Democratic base voters. And if he can't peel off a few Trump voters and get those white working class voters, he also has a problem. So
right, I think that's the point. If Joe Biden sees winning the South Carolina primary as what this is about, then I get his message. But if his goal is to win the Electoral College and win Michigan working class white voters and Pennsylvania working class white voters, I don't know that Charlottesville is the best. Look, why shouldn't it be what Andrew Yang is talking about? Automation.
Well, Biden had a piece. I mean, I wrote about this back in September 2017. I just retweeted. So I've written 3, I would say, significant Biden pieces over the last 18 months. And the first one was suggesting in 2017 that Biden's platform for 2020 would be anti-populism. And I think, and everything that's happened since, I do think bears that out. And then that's not to say that he doesn't want to appeal to white working class, but because he does, but he doesn't want to do it in the way that Bernie and Warren have been doing it. So he had a piece back in the fall of 2017 that took a swipe at universal basic income as the wrong way to deal with these issues of automation, because it did not respect the dignity of work. Everyone credited Sherrod Brown with the dignity of work message, but Biden was saying that back in 2017, and others said it before him. I don't think Biden coined the term. And so he made an argument that we put work first, that we need to and education had to be aligned with that, and there had to be free community college. I think it was free community college, and apprenticeships and things of that nature, so we can get America back to work again. Yang, coming out of sort of the Silicon Valley world, is championing the universal basic income message, which interestingly, Bernie hasn't embraced, and Warren hasn't embraced. It's not something that's been. I mean, there are folks in the Democratic Socialist world that like it, but it's not universally accepted amongst socialists. And it's been a pet project of certain Silicon Valley liberals because they're the ones who are being blamed for all the technological displacement. That's their way to say, let us keep doing what we're doing, and the people we're displacing can still eat. So Yang presumably will be in the debates, and he'll talk about this. But Biden is certainly going to talk about an economic vision for the country too, and I think that my understanding is that his speech in Pittsburgh on Monday is going to hit those points. Biden is trying. I mean, the challenge for Biden is to blend all these things into a cohesive message. If you look at it as sort of disparate checkboxing, then it doesn't gel. And Biden,
that's the fundamental. I mean, I think what you're talking about is the fundamental problem that Joe Biden has is that there's not a big, hairy, compelling message. It's a lot of little things that have to sort of be try to make coherent, and that there's not the big idea.
Well, I can't say that what the big idea is, but just from what I have heard, I mean, his overarching point in all the run-up speeches has been, this is not who we are, the clear inference being Trump's worldview. We have to come together. We can come together to do big things. Bipartisanship is a big part of that. I'm not going to hate on Republicans because we're going to need their help. Unions are the backbone of America. Working people are the backbone of America. We have to put them first. So there is certainly a way to take all those themes and channel into a policy agenda. And we'll see when he speaks. He's going on The View Friday. He's going to have his speech on Monday. You'll see pretty quickly if he's got that figured out. One, for his sake, being the last one in and having all this extra time to line up your ducks, he should hope that he used that time wisely, so he really hits the ground running, and you get how it all comes together very quickly. Someone like Beto O'Rourke, who I've been a skeptic about for a long time, kind of barreled in on the premise of his personality being sufficient, and I feel like now he's sort of playing catch up. I'm like, okay, what is the actual message, and what is the policy agenda? And I'm gonna listen to the public and work at it as I go. If you're Hillary Clinton, you can do your listening tour because there aren't 17 other people, trampling over you. And Beto's doing this kind of late, and I would, if I were him, I'd be very concerned that he's going to miss the window here. Biden presumably has it figured out well enough that you're going to get it quickly. I think Warren has a very fleshed out message that she's not making it up on the fly. Bernie obviously has been saying the same thing for 20 years.
Yeah. I think my bias is figure out what it is you're about and talk about that a lot, right? And I think Yang is doing that with UBI. I mean, I think with Biden, there should just be three things. I mean, it could be experience. I was Obama's, vice president for 8 years. We are going to unite people, get away from this. This actually ties into the Charlottesville thing, but get rid of the hate and work across party lines. Two or three things, and really own the brand. And I just feel like even if you're just writing a political column, this, Bill, if you're writing even just a column that's going to 750-word column, the big challenge is what is this about, and how do I murder my darlings and get rid of the extraneous stuff that doesn't fit what this is about? And the problem is when you get into sort of ruling by committee, and it's I got to say this so that the unions like it, and I got to throw in this part, more, put something in the speech, that's going to keep South Carolina on board, and then I got to put. Next thing you know, you don't really have a message. you have like a speech by committee, and I think that's the danger that they all have, including Joe Biden.
Let's shift gears away from Biden for a bit, because I think the candidate that's been having the best last few days has been Elizabeth Warren, although not reflected in the polls yet. So this is really only based on media commentary and activist commentary, some good responses in town halls and such. She's still stuck around 6%, clustered in with Kamala and Beto, who has been dropping. He was 4 the last poll I saw, actually. And Buttigieg, who has been going up, although I feel like we're starting to get the negative Buttigieg pieces now, so maybe that's going to stall out. But you're getting a fair amount of commentary. Hey, Warren, she keeps having all these policy papers. She's really winning the ideas debate. And, she has a pretty good stump, and she does work a crowd pretty well. She's even, winning plaudits from African-American leaders. Yeah. And
there's something, there is something to be said for, I don't want to say like lovable loser, but like for reinvention. Like, I think that John McCain, this is not to be compared with what happened to John McCain, but in 2007, John McCain's campaign imploded and he was sort of left for dead. And I think that there was then, once he had been kind of humbled, there was some currency in revitalizing John McCain and writing the comeback story. And again, I don't think that Elizabeth Warren has endured the gauntlet that McCain went through that cycle, but maybe there is an appeal to like a Elizabeth Warren comebacks, how she got her mojo back or something.
Well, there's a certain parallel there in that I think both McCain in 2007 and Warren today didn't really do any kind of major recalibrations. They just kind of gutted it out and doubled down on themselves and their own brands. And what I think is potentially different is McCain came in as a front runner and had a pretty weak field to overcome. Giuliani was kind of the main competition early on. He self-imploded himself. Warren's got both. I think Biden and Bernie as sort of big figures to overcome, and there's a more of a singular reason why she fell back into the pack, which is the Pocahontas episode, which, in my opinion, and I don't think I'm alone here. I've seen it come from reporting from what voters say. Is she went toe-to-toe with Trump and she lost. And she took his bait. She handled it poorly. I primarily wanted someone who was going to beat Trump and deal with his bully tactic, and she didn't do it well. So she is regaining credibility and stature by defining herself as the ideas candidate, which is not nothing. It certainly gets you from going down to zero. But it doesn't really address what the big problem is that's keeping you out of the top tier. Now, the piece I'm actually working on right now, it's not published. I haven't finished writing it yet. There's often an ideas candidate in a primary, but that candidate usually loses. The ideas candidate tends to be someone coming from the back of the pack, trying to pick up something edgy and unique.
John McCain in 2000 was
John McCain in 2000
campaign finance reform.
Campaign finance reform, exactly. And a lot of times, ideas candidates can lose the battle and win the war. John McCain didn't beat George Bush, but he forced George Bush to sign campaign finance reform. He did well enough to argue his issue that he was able to build a bipartisan coalition around and box George Bush in. And it is possible that Elizabeth Warren is going to have all these great policy ideas, and the eventual nominee scoops up the best of them and runs with it and makes it his or her own. Maybe even enacts it into law. But Bernie Sanders really has moved the party in his direction. I don't think he's won the arguments outright yet, but a heck of a lot more people for single payer than there were before. So that dynamic is not new, but usually what makes you the winner is a sense of long-term viability and electability, and the person who has that edge can steal the better ideas from the ideas candidates. And also, conversely, sometimes the ideas candidates put forth ideas that don't fly. And, Bruce Babbitt did not become any great hero for pushing the national sales tax. Steve Forbes never made flat tax the sacrosanct position of the Republican Party. Warren is winning the ideas debate now largely because there's no competition. She's issuing the policy papers, and almost nobody else is. But she hasn't had those ideas really put to the test yet. And there are some big questions about the viability of those ideas, and I think the biggest one is the wealth tax. I mean, a lot of the ideas she has are funded by the wealth tax. The wealth tax is, we're going to do a surcharge on your assets above $50 million and an extra surcharge above $1 billion. And her estimate is that rakes in $2.75 trillion over a 10-year period, and that funds her universal child care program, and that funds her student debt cancellation, other college affordability plans. I think the two of those combined take up the large portion of the wealth tax. Now, she has other taxes, mind you, that she's pushing, and other ideas with big prices.
This is like a Deus Ex Machina or something. Like, it must be great to just say, what is a problem? Let's see. You know what? We could use here in Alexandria, Virginia, maybe more rapid transit to get me to the metro. That'd be nice. I don't know. How do we pay for it? Oh, we'll tax rich people and they'll just pay. No problem, right? Like, it must just be great to have that as like a default solution to everything. Like, what would people like? Let's say we're going to do that, and we'll get the money from taxing rich people more. Problem solved.
Well, I mean, a lot of Democrats.
Such an easy argument.
You can go back to Bruce Babbitt. You can go back to Bruce Babbitt in 1988, who said, "I'm the only person who's going to stand up and say we have to raise taxes. Who will stand up?" And he actually literally stood up in the debate. Who will stand up with me? Of course, nobody did. And he tried to make himself the real truth teller, and he got almost no votes doing that. And pretty much ever since, Democrats. And Dukakis, of course, got hit very hard for
Mondale, too.
Well, Mondale put it out there. Mondale was more like Bruce Babbitt. Mondale was like, Reagan has run up all these deficits, and I'm not going to lie to you. We're going to have to raise some taxes. And Mondale was not wrong, because Reagan raised taxes upon his reelection. But obviously it wasn't a winning message in the 1984 election. And Dukakis tried to kind of dance around it. And so we got hit with it anyway, even though we didn't have a hardcore tax-raising policy out there. He's kind of left the door open. That was enough to be hit with. Ever since, Bill Clinton, middle-class tax cut. Everything since then has been, not that it always gets enacted in policy, but the rhetoric has always been, we're going to cut middle-class taxes, we're going to raise taxes on the rich. Whatever we need to do that requires money, it's going to be on the rich, not on you. And that limits, generally, what you can offer, because there's only so much money available to you from rich people. Bernie, when he talks about his stuff, he uses soak the rich rhetoric, but he does it with the same level of specificity on it that Warren has. Warren has put hard numbers. Some argue that they're rosy numbers. Some say her estimates shouldn't necessarily be treated as rock solid, but they are at least numbers that you can say this is what her estimate is, and this is what her estimate of her proposals are. They're not small numbers. It's not like she's not lowballing things, it seems.
Yeah.
She might be highballing the revenue she gets in, but she's not lowballing the cost of her programs. And
I think what I'm saying, though, is I think you may be right. Like, admitting that you're going to raise taxes may not work in a general election because people might just assume that it's going to hit them no matter what you say in terms of the class warfare argument and rhetoric. But if you want to gain steam on the left and get praise, it seems like a pretty cheap, like, in other words, I don't want to like bestow upon her this mantle of policy expertise. Like, it's a pretty easy and cheap thing to say, I'm going to do these things you want, and we'll get the money by taxing the rich.
Right. No, that is not a politically risky argument to make, in the not that there's zero political risk, but that's sort of safer ground than a lot of other things you might say. Now, I think the challenge for Warren here is convincing folks this is really feasible, and one, it's just hard to pass tax increases through Congress, period. Although she's already suggested she get rid of the filibuster. She suggested she will expand the Supreme Court. And this brings me to, I think, the biggest question here. There's a big question whether the wealth tax is constitutional, because the 16th Amendment specifies that you can have an income tax. It does not specify you can have a wealth tax, and there is debate over how that should be interpreted. And it's probably a safe argument that this Supreme Court would interpret it literally and not give you the latitude to do a wealth tax. And if you can't do a wealth tax, well, then you just take off a lot of money off the table, and it leads you to question whether Warren's policies can actually come into being.
Well, I mean, not to get too far afield here, but I will say, and this isn't original to me, but when people talk about income inequality, like, I can tell you, Bill, my income is very high, but my expenses living in the D.C. area are incredibly high. And so my wealth is not, a wealth tax would not hurt me. An income tax might really, an income tax could be devastating. You don't have 50 million
in assets, I assume, Matt.
What's that?
I assume you don't have 50 million in assets.
My assets are not quite at that level.
We're talking about a very small class of people who would be affected by Warren's wealth tax, but under her estimate would bring in a lot of money. So you can see the political efficacy to the pitch. But I don't know what Biden's going to say about it. I know that Klobuchar said she thought that Warren's debt cancellation plan was not realistic. With that stage so big and so many people in there, I assume somebody is going to say, you can't bank on that wealth tax. It's arguably unconstitutional. All these things sound very nice, but if we can't actually raise the revenue for them, it's not fair to get people's hopes up. I don't know if someone's going to make that case in a effective way, or if Warren can just steamroll them and say, we can't have this kind of naysaying. We have to deal with wealth inequality, and we need to deal with child care. We need to deal with student debt. We need to deal with housing, et cetera. But that is going to be the challenge for her, is to convince people that this agenda is actually feasible politically and legislatively. And that's not only pertinent to can't you win the nomination at the end of the day, but can the ideas win at the end of the day? So I would not assume, based on today, that she has won the issues debate and she will define the Democratic Party's platform. She might, but there's still a lot of work to do.
But at least by virtue of kind of going to her bread and butter and returning to maybe the thing that she can do that no one else is doing, she has managed to at least stem the bleeding, because there were a lot of stories about how her campaign was really in trouble. And it seems, at least in terms of the media perception, that she has started to right the ship.
Yeah, I think she's not going to flatline. I think she will make it to Iowa, which I will not say about all the candidates. She has, I think, a base of support that can carry her through the early contest, at least. The question is, and I think this is not just for her, if Biden doesn't tank, if Biden's high 20s, low 30s support coming in holds, and Bernie's low to mid 20s holds, they will be top tier candidates through this process.
Yeah.
And that limits how many other people can be top tier candidates. You now have taken half the electorate off the table. You only can probably fit one or two more people in that top tier, probably just one. So right now your second tier is Kamala, Beto, Buttigieg, and Warren. Those are the four who are above 5%. And if now I could very easily see Beto and Buttigieg dropping off, easier I think than Kamala and Harris, than Kamala and Warren. But then even then, the two of them are jousting with each other to be the who is going to be the non-white guy in this scenario. If they're keeping each other below 15, then neither one gets in the top tier. Someone's got to vanquish the rest of that second tier pack. And if Kamala has her people being the best performing person of color in the race, and Warren has her people because she's got the most policy papers in the race, they may cancel each other out.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how it plays out. And, will Biden and Bernie compete for who gets to be the old codger in the race? Will Warren and Bernie compete to see who gets to be the kind of progressive socialist?
What squeezes Warren here? There's actually a piece that came out this week about Bernie bros who are becoming Liz lads. And so there's definitely a fan base there, and she could peel off some of Bernie's support, I would say. I mean, again, I have no statistical evidence of this to date, but you could foresee it. But there are definitely Bernie people who are Bernie people who are not going to go anywhere. She's never going to take the lion's share of the Bernie vote. She needs to maybe get a piece of that, but add votes from the other people. And the risk of the ideas candidate is ideas that have edge, ideas that are not presently in the mainstream of the party, tend to make elements of the party nervous. Makes people nervous that you can be an electable candidate. You might push the envelope in a way that benefits you over benefit the ideas in the long term, but it's hard for that person to be the nominee because the nominee tends to be squarely in the mainstream of the party, not on the edge of the party.
Well, it seems like if you have one big, innovative, interesting idea that you could brand, that's your thing, and then you could, on everything else, kind of check the boxes. That sometimes works, like with McCain in 2000, you might, now granted, it's a bad example because McCain did not win in 2000, but you might have said, yeah, look, I think there's this swamp in D.C. and money's corrupting, so I'll go with McCain on that. But at least he's also pro-life and he's for a strong national defense. Now, McCain did get in trouble when he went against the agents of intolerance, and that may be example of what you're talking about, of where you start to become too unorthodox and lose.
Well, campaign finance itself was pretty unorthodox for Republicans. I mean, that only added to the problem for him to win the nomination. But
what I'm saying is, I think if you have one big contrarian idea that you can brand, maybe that one is enough. But if you're doing what Elizabeth Warren is doing, which is kind of going out there on a limb on a lot of issues, it's maybe not as tenable.
Well, Jack Kemp's kind of an example of that. Back in 1988, he was sort of a darling of economic conservatives, sort of the consummate supply-sider. But he's going against Bush and Dole. George H.W. Bush, who eventually got the nomination, sort of two more established figures, more mainstream Republicans, not folks known for disregarding deficits. I mean, Jack Kemp was running on rejecting deficit mania in 1988, and of course today we're Dick Cheney's Republican Party, deficits don't matter. But in 1988, there were a lot of Republicans that were horrified by that message, and Jack Kemp was pushing the gold standard, and Jack Kemp was calling himself a progressive conservative and saying the party should appeal to African Americans and labor. He was espousing pro-labor positions. So there's a whole host of things that were very eclectic that was too much for the party to embrace. Now, Warren is not all over the map ideologically. She's pretty squarely economically populist, but it's somewhat finely calibrated away from democratic socialism to be pro markets, which somewhat limits the appeal and makes her hard to unify that left flank of the party.
Well, I definitely think that the most interesting and compelling candidate is Andrew Yang right now.
You're YangGang, so you're off the Tulsi bandwagon.
Well, I'm not supporting him. My concern with the UBI is that there's no limiting principle. I'm writing a piece about this right now, and I'm hoping to talk to him. And look, what Yang says is
the limiting principle is that you run out of money and the checks become smaller.
Well, he wants to give $1,000 a month to every citizen, and going to what Joe Biden said, this would not necessarily replace work, right? Because it's hard to imagine surviving on $12,000 a year, but it would be something that, as he, sort of using his word, that it's a freedom dividend that membership as a citizen in the richest, freest country in the world grants you this. And it would be a way to subsidize your income and maybe allow you to engage in other pursuits that could be entrepreneurial that you might not otherwise have a chance to do. It would also lessen the hit that a lot. I think, according to Yang, there are 29 states where truck driver is the number one job, and that is likely going to be replaced by AI. So I don't know. I think that he is the most interesting person. My concern is, let's say we go for it and we open the door to accepting his premise that everyone should be paid $1,000 a month. How do you, when Elizabeth Warren comes along and says, well, it should be $3,000 a month? How do you fight that? 3,000 seems better to me than 1,000, right?
How much money's in the kitty? What programs are you cutting to pay for that, to subsidize that check?
No, but part of Yang's argument isn't just we can afford this. It's this. We don't want this to replace working. We want this to subsidize you, but not to replace working. But certainly we could get to a number pretty quickly that would replace working.
So now that you're officially YangGang, where are you on circumcision?
So I've listened to him. Yang, it's interesting. Instead of going on The View, Yang has decided to reach a larger audience by going on Joe Rogan's podcast and Ben Shapiro's podcast. And Ben Shapiro asked him about circumcision. And Yang basically said that not circumcising was a decision that he and his wife made, but they've been to other people's bris or brisses or whatever the word is, and he doesn't really care what other people. It's literally
a policy position on his campaign webpage.
I'm just telling you what he said.
He's not going to go for it. He's not going to go for pro-choice circumcision. It's literally a policy paper on his website.
Well, if I'm supposed to talk to him, we'll see if it happens, and maybe I'll bring that up. So you're saying that he is like not only is he personally anti-circumcision, but he thinks that there should be mandates.
Well, forgive me, I don't recall exactly where on the website, but if his position is that we all can circumcise if we want to, like, that's status quo. Yeah, I don't need you to talk about it on your website for that to be the policy of the land. That is the current policy of the land.
Yeah. Well, look, I think that his position on UBI and automation has really dominated, and if he catches on, there may be a whole bunch of other little things like circumcision. Not that it's a terribly little thing, but there may be things like circumcision that are weird positions to take that will haunt him if he were to catch on.
Let's leave it out there, Matt. What do you got to plug for this week?
Oh, well, you know me, but I don't like to talk about myself or shamelessly self-promote. So, just stay tuned for my work at the Daily Beast.
I have a podcast coming, the New Books and Politics podcast with Michael A. Cohen, not that Michael Cohen. Michael A. Cohen, the Boston Globe columnist. He was co-authored a new book, Clear and Present Safety, an argument that the world is in a much better place than we give it credit for, and how we can use the lessons learned from our successes around the world to deal with what problems do remain in America and elsewhere. So, great conversation. That should be up in the next few days.
Well, it sounds optimistic and hopeful, and so clearly it's a bad idea. Well, welcome back, Bill.
Thank
Glad
you.
we could get the band back together, and thank you all for watching us in the DMZ.
Till next week.
Yeah.